I was gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles had turned white when the school counselor's words echoed through the conference room like a death sentence. She was sitting across from me at that cold metal table, clipboard in hand, speaking in that patronizing tone educators use when they think they're being gentle but are actually being cruel. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Mrs. Chen, I think it's time we consider moving Danny to our special needs program, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. He's just not keeping up with his peers, and frankly, we're concerned about his cognitive development. The fluorescent lights above us hummed like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across her face as she delivered words that felt like a punch to my stomach. Around that table sat 4 other people: the principal, Danny's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, the school psychologist, and another administrator whose name I'd already forgotten. All of them nodding in agreement, like they'd already decided my 8-year-old son's entire future without him even being in the room. Let me take you back to the beginning of this nightmare. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm 32 years old. I work as a night shift nurse at Metropolitan General Hospital, which means I'm constantly exhausted, constantly worried about money, and constantly trying to be both mother and father to my son Danny since his dad walked out on us 3 years ago. Michael couldn't handle the responsibility, couldn't handle the sleepless nights, couldn't handle having a child who didn't fit into his perfect picture of what a family should look like. So he left, and it's been just me and Danny ever since. Danny is 8 years old, quiet, thoughtful, with these incredible dark eyes that seem to see everything. He's always been different from other kids his age. While they're running around screaming on playgrounds, he's sitting under a tree examining leaves or asking me why the sky changes colors at sunset. He speaks slowly, carefully, like he's weighing each word before it leaves his mouth. Other parents at school pickup have always looked at him strangely, whispering to each other when they think I can't hear. I've caught fragments of their conversations over the years. That Chen boy seems a bit odd, or he barely talks to the other children, or my personal favorite, maybe he's just slow. That word, slow. It had followed Danny through his entire school career like a shadow he couldn't shake. It started in kindergarten when Mrs. Patterson told me during parent-teacher conferences that Danny wasn't participating in group activities. He just sits there, she said, concern creasing her weathered face. The other children are singing songs, clapping hands, and Danny just watches. He seems lost most of the time. I tried to explain that Danny was shy, that he needed time to warm up to new situations, that he was actually incredibly smart and curious at home. But Mrs. Patterson just nodded politely and made notes on her clipboard. The same clipboard that would follow Danny from grade to grade, accumulating more and more evidence that he was somehow deficient, somehow broken, somehow less than the other children. First grade was worse. Mrs. Williams was young, enthusiastic, and completely unprepared for a child like Danny. She wanted him to be loud and energetic and quick to raise his hand. When he wasn't, she assumed he didn't know the answers. Danny seems to struggle with basic concepts, she wrote in his progress report. He rarely participates in class discussions and appears to have difficulty following simple instructions. I spent countless nights at our tiny kitchen table helping Danny with homework, watching him work through math problems that I knew he understood perfectly. He would get every single answer right, but slowly, methodically, checking and double-checking his work. When I asked him why he didn't raise his hand in class when he knew the answers, he would shrug his small shoulders and say, "They don't wait long enough, Mama. They ask the question and want the answer right away. I need to think about it first." Second grade brought Mrs. Rodriguez, a veteran teacher who had been at Lincoln Elementary for 27 years. She was set in her ways, convinced that she could spot a struggling student from across the room. Danny became her pet project, the child she was determined to fix. She would pull him aside during reading time, speaking to him in that slow, exaggerated way people use when they think you can't understand them. "Danny, can you sound out this word for me? Take your time, sweetheart." The other kids noticed, of course. They always do. They started calling him Slow Danny on the playground. They would giggle when he took too long to answer a question during math time. They excluded him from their games because he didn't run fast enough, didn't react quickly enough, didn't fit into their 8-year-old version of normal. I watched my bright, curious, thoughtful little boy start to believe what everyone was telling him about himself. He stopped asking me questions about the stars or why certain flowers only bloom at night. He stopped building elaborate structures with his blocks, stopped drawing the detailed pictures that used to cover our refrigerator. He became quiet in a different way, not the peaceful quiet of deep thinking, but the defeated quiet of someone who has given up trying to prove they belong. The school meetings started in October of his second grade year. Mrs. Rodriguez requested a conference to discuss Danny's academic challenges. I sat in those same uncomfortable plastic chairs that every parent dreads, listening to her recite a litany of complaints about my son. He didn't finish his work on time. He didn't participate in group activities. He seemed distracted during lessons. He needed extra prompting to complete simple tasks. "Have you considered having him tested for learning disabilities?" she asked, her voice gentle but her eyes pitying. "There are programs that might be better, suited for his needs." I felt my chest tighten with familiar anger and frustration. These people saw my son for 6 hours a day in a classroom environment that clearly wasn't working for him, and they had decided that meant something was wrong with him rather than wrong with their approach. At home, Danny could explain to me, in detail, how photosynthesis worked after watching a nature documentary. He could build complex puzzles that challenged kids twice his age. He could remember conversations we'd had weeks ago, word for word. But because he didn't perform on their timeline, in their way, according to their standards, he was labeled as slow. The testing began in November. They pulled Danny out of class 3 times a week to work with the school psychologist, Dr. Martinez. Each time he came back to our apartment afterward, he seemed a little smaller, a little more defeated. "They keep asking me the same questions over and over," he told me one evening as I helped him with his spelling homework. "Like they think I'm going to change my answers." Dr. Martinez called me in December to discuss the results. "Danny shows some signs of processing delays," she explained, shuffling through papers that apparently contained my son's entire academic future. "His response time is significantly slower than his peers, and he seems to have difficulty with traditional classroom learning." Traditional classroom learning. As if there was something wrong with Danny for not thriving in a system designed for a completely different type of learner. I asked what this meant for his future, and Dr. Martinez launched into an explanation about individualized education plans and specialized programs and lowered expectations. "We want to set him up for success," she said. "And sometimes that means adjusting our goals to match his capabilities." His capabilities. Like they had any idea what my son was capable of when they'd never bothered to truly see him, to understand him, to meet him where he was instead of demanding he meet them where they were comfortable. Christmas break came and went, and I spent those 2 weeks watching Danny be himself again. Away from the pressure and judgment of school, he bloomed. He asked me hundreds of questions about everything from why snow melts to how airplanes stay in the sky. He built an elaborate city out of cardboard boxes that included working traffic lights made from his art supplies. He read books that were supposedly above his grade level and understood every word. But January brought us back to Lincoln Elementary, back to Mrs. Rodriguez and her concerned looks, back to Dr. Martinez and her clipboards full of evidence that my son wasn't measuring up. The meetings intensified. They wanted to move Danny to the special education classroom for math and reading. They wanted to reduce his homework load. They wanted to lower the bar so far that he would never have to struggle to reach it. "It's really for the best," Mrs. Rodriguez assured me during one particularly frustrating conference. Danny will feel more successful in an environment that's designed for his learning style. His learning style. They had decided that Danny's learning style was slow, remedial, limited. They had never considered that maybe their teaching style was the problem. Maybe the rigid structure, the quick pace, the emphasis on immediate responses was what was holding him back, not some inherent deficit in his ability to learn. By February, I was losing sleep over this situation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I would lie awake at night after my shifts at the hospital, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I was being a stubborn mother who couldn't accept her child's limitations, or if I was the only person who truly saw Danny for who he was. The way? Doubt crept in during my weakest moments. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was in denial. Maybe Danny really was slow, and I was doing him a disservice by fighting their recommendations. But then I would watch him at home, see the light in his eyes when he discovered something new, hear the complexity of his thoughts when he felt safe enough to share them, and I knew in my heart that the school was wrong. Danny wasn't slow. He was different. He processed information differently, responded differently, learned differently. But different didn't mean deficient. The final straw came in March. Mrs. Rodriguez called me at work, interrupting my shift to tell me that Danny had had a particularly difficult day. He just sat there during math time, she said, exasperation clear in her voice. We asked him to solve a simple addition problem on the board, and he froze completely. Sarah, I think it's time to face the reality that Danny needs more support than we can provide in a regular classroom. That night, I sat Danny down at our kitchen table and asked him what had happened during math time. His eyes filled with tears as he explained that he knew the answer to the problem, but Mrs. Rodriguez had called on him suddenly, and all the other kids were staring at him, and he couldn't think with everyone watching and waiting and judging. I knew it was 47, Mama, he whispered. But when everyone was looking at me, the numbers got all mixed up in my head and I couldn't remember how to say it. My heart broke for this sensitive, intelligent little boy who was being failed by a system that couldn't see past his quiet nature and careful processing style. I made a decision that night that would change everything. I was going to get Danny, independently tested by someone who didn't know about his school records, someone who wouldn't have preconceived notions about his abilities. It took me 3 weeks to save up the money for a comprehensive psychological evaluation with Dr. Patricia Williams, a child psychologist who specialized in gifted children and had a reputation for seeing beyond surface behaviors. Her office was nothing like the sterile conference rooms at Lincoln Elementary. It was warm and welcoming, filled with books and puzzles and interesting objects that immediately caught Danny's attention. Dr. Williams spent the entire first session just talking with Danny, asking him about his interests, his thoughts, his dreams. She didn't rush him or interrupt him or make him feel like his careful way of speaking was wrong. She listened when he explained his theory about why cats purr, nodded thoughtfully when he described the castle he was building in his imagination, smiled when he told her about the book he was writing about a boy who could talk to trees. Danny is a fascinating child, she told me after that first session. He has a very unique way of processing information, but I can already see that there's much more going on in that mind of his than anyone has given him credit for. The testing took place over 3 sessions in April. Each time I dropped Danny off, I felt a mixture of hope and terror. Hope that Dr. Williams would see what I saw in my son. Terror that maybe the school was right. Maybe I had been fooling myself all along. On the day Dr. Williams called to schedule our follow-up appointment to discuss the results, I could barely concentrate at work. My hands shook as I took patients' vital signs. My mind raced through all the possible outcomes. What if Danny really did have significant learning disabilities? What if I had been pushing him too hard, expecting too much? What if the school was right and I was just a mother in denial? The appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 4 o'clock. I took the afternoon off work, picked Danny up from school early, and drove to Dr. Williams's office with my stomach in knots. Danny chattered nervously in the back seat about a bird he'd seen during recess, and I tried to focus on his words instead of the anxiety coursing through my veins. Dr. Williams greeted us in her waiting room with a warm smile, but I couldn't read anything in her expression. She led us into her office, and Danny immediately gravitated toward a complex puzzle on her coffee table while she and I took seats across from each other. "Sarah," she began, opening a thick folder that contained the results of Danny's evaluation, "I want to start by saying that your instincts about your son have been absolutely correct." My heart stopped beating for a moment. "What do you mean?" She looked over at Danny, who was completely absorbed in the puzzle, his small fingers moving pieces with careful precision. "Danny is not slow. He's not learning disabled. He's not developmentally delayed." She paused and I held my breath. "Danny is profoundly gifted." The words hit me like a physical blow. Gifted? "His IQ score is 158, Dr. Williams continued. "That places him in the 99th percentile. Sarah, your son is intellectually gifted to a degree that fewer than 1% of children ever achieve." I felt dizzy. The room seemed to spin around me. But the school said, "The school was wrong," Dr. Williams said firmly. "Danny's behaviors that they interpreted as signs of cognitive delay are actually classic indicators of intellectual giftedness. His need for processing time, his perfectionism, his sensitivity to social dynamics, his preference for deep thinking over quick responses, these are all hallmarks of a highly gifted child." She went on to explain that Danny's slow response time wasn't because he didn't know the answers, but because his mind was considering multiple layers of complexity that other children his age couldn't even perceive. His reluctance to participate in class wasn't due to confusion or inability, but because he was processing information at such an advanced level that the classroom pace felt painfully slow to him. "Gifted children often appear to be daydreaming or disengaged," Dr. Williams explained, "when they're actually thinking at a level that's far beyond what's being presented to them. Danny has been intellectually bored and understimulated for years, which can look very similar to learning disabilities to educators who aren't trained to recognize giftedness." I looked over at Danny, who had nearly completed the puzzle that was labeled for ages 12 and up. My quiet, thoughtful, supposedly slow little boy was actually intellectually operating at the level of a teenager. All those times I'd watched him struggle in school, all those meetings where teachers described him as behind or delayed, all those moments when I'd wondered if I was expecting too much from him, the truth was that everyone else had been expecting far too little. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Williams smiled. "Now we show the school what Danny is really capable of. Now we demand that he be given the education he deserves. Now we watch him soar." The next morning felt different somehow, like the air itself had changed overnight. I woke up with Dr. Williams' words still echoing in my mind. 158, profoundly gifted, 99th percentile. Danny was getting ready for school in his usual methodical way, carefully packing his backpack, double-checking that he had his pencils sharpened just right. He had no idea that everything was about to change. I had requested an emergency meeting with the school administration for that afternoon. Principal Morrison sounded annoyed when I called, sighing heavily into the phone as if my request was a tremendous inconvenience. "Mrs. Chen, we've already discussed Danny's placement extensively. I'm not sure what more there is to talk about." "There's plenty to talk about," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in months. "I have new information that changes everything." At 3:30 that afternoon, I walked into Lincoln Elementary carrying a manila envelope that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Inside were Danny's test results, complete with Dr. Williams' detailed analysis and recommendations. My hands weren't shaking this time. My voice wasn't trembling. I knew exactly who my son was now, and I wasn't going to let anyone make me doubt it again. The conference room looked exactly the same as it had during every other meeting. Same fluorescent lights, same uncomfortable chairs, same collection of adults who thought they knew my child better than I did. Principal Morrison sat at the head of the table, flanked by Mrs. Rodriguez, Dr. Martinez, and the special education coordinator, Ms. Patterson. They all had that same expression of patient condescension, like they were humoring a difficult parent who refused to accept reality. "Thank you for coming," Principal Morrison began, folding his hands on the table. "Now, about Danny's placement in our special needs program." "That won't be happening," I interrupted, placing the envelope on the table. "In fact, I think you're going to want to see these test results before we discuss Danny's placement anywhere." Mrs. Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Dr. Martinez. "Mrs. Chen, we've already completed comprehensive testing with Danny. We know what his capabilities are." "No," I said firmly. "You know what you think his capabilities are. But you've been wrong about my son from the very beginning." I opened the envelope and pulled out Dr. Williams's report. The room went quiet as I began reading the key findings aloud. IQ score of 158, placing him in the 99th. Percentile for intellectual ability. Demonstrates exceptional reasoning skills, advanced problem-solving capabilities, and profound depth of thinking typically seen in children significantly older. Principal Morrison's eyebrows shot up. "I'm sorry, what?" "My son isn't slow," I continued, feeling power surge through my voice. "He's not learning disabled. He's not developmentally delayed. Danny is profoundly gifted, and your school has been failing him catastrophically for 3 years." The silence in the room was deafening. Dr. Martinez reached for the report with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the pages with growing disbelief. Mrs. Rodriguez sat frozen, her mouth slightly open. Ms. Patterson stared at the test scores like they were written in a foreign language. "This can't be right," Mrs. Rodriguez finally whispered. "Danny barely participates in class. He doesn't finish his work on time. He seems confused most of the time." "He seems bored most of the time," I corrected, "because you've been teaching him material that's years below his intellectual level. Do you have any idea what it's like? For a child with an IQ of 158 to sit through lessons designed for average 8-year-olds? It's torture." Dr. Williams had explained this to me in detail. Gifted children often shut down in environments that don't challenge them. They stop participating because the material is too easy to hold their interest. They appear distracted because their minds are operating on levels that aren't being addressed. They seem slow to respond because they're considering complexities that other children can't even perceive. Principal Morrison cleared his throat. "Even if these test results are accurate, Mrs. Chen, we need to consider Danny's classroom behavior. He's struggled socially, academically. He's struggled because you've been treating him like he's deficient when he's actually exceptional," I shot back. "Every single behavior you've labeled as problematic is actually a sign of intellectual giftedness. His need for processing time isn't a delay, it's depth. His perfectionism isn't a disorder. It's a characteristic of advanced thinking. His social difficulties aren't developmental issues. They're the result of being intellectually isolated from his peers." Mrs. Rodriguez looked like she might cry. "But he never shows his work in math. He just writes down answers without explaining how he got them. Because the problems are so simple for him that showing his work would be like asking you to explain how you spell your own name," I replied. "He's been solving equations in his head that most kids need calculators for." I pulled out another document from the envelope. Dr. Williams recommends immediate placement in the Gifted and Talented program, acceleration in mathematics and reading, and a complete restructuring of Danny's educational plan. She also suggests that several of his teachers receive training in identifying and working with intellectually gifted children, since you've so completely missed the signs. The room erupted in defensive murmurs. Principal Morrison tried to regain control. Now, Mrs. Chen, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Just because one outside evaluator? Dr. Patricia Williams is one of the most respected child psychologists in the state, I interrupted. She specializes in gifted children and has 30 years of experience. Her evaluation is infinitely more credible than your assumptions based on Danny not raising his hand fast enough. Dr. Martinez was still staring at the test results. 158, she murmured. That's higher than most adults. That's genius level. Yes, I said simply. My son is a genius, and you've been treating him like he's intellectually disabled. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. These educators, who prided themselves on their ability to identify and nurture children's potential, had not only failed to recognize exceptional ability, they had actively worked to suppress it. They had taken a child with extraordinary intellectual gifts and convinced him that he was broken. Mrs. Rodriguez broke the silence with a shaky voice. We had no idea. If we had known. You should have known, I said, not unkindly but firmly. The signs were all there. You just chose to interpret them as deficits instead of differences. How many other children have you mislabeled? How many other gifted kids are sitting in special education programs because you don't know how to recognize intellectual giftedness? Principal Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What exactly are you asking us to do, Mrs. Chen? I'm not asking, I said, my voice steel strong. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Danny will be immediately transferred to the gifted program. He'll be given work that actually challenges his intellect. His teachers will be educated about the characteristics of intellectually gifted children. And there will be a formal apology issued for the years of educational neglect he's endured. And if we refuse? Principal Morrison asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I smiled for the first time since entering that room. Then I'll be contacting the school district, the state education department, and every local news outlet I can think of. I'm sure they'd be very interested in a story about how Lincoln Elementary mistook a genius for a special needs student and spent 3 years trying to lower his educational standards. The meeting ended with hasty promises and nervous agreements. By the following Monday, Danny was enrolled in the Gifted and Talented program. His new teacher, Ms. Thompson, actually understood what she was looking at when Danny took his time to consider complex problems. She recognized his careful processing, style as a sign of deep thinking, not slow thinking. The transformation was immediate and remarkable. Danny started participating in class discussions because the topics were finally worth his intellectual attention. He began completing assignments quickly because they actually required his mental energy. He made friends with other gifted children, who shared his intensity and curiosity. But the most beautiful change was in Danny himself. The defeated slump in his shoulders disappeared. The hesitant way he used to speak vanished. He started asking me those wonderful questions again, sharing his elaborate theories, building his impossible structures. He remembered that he was brilliant, and everyone around him finally saw it too. 3 months later, Danny scored in the 99th percentile on the state standardized tests. 6 months later, he was selected for the state academic competition team. A year later, he was reading at a high school level and solving algebraic equations that challenged kids twice his age. The vindication felt incredible, but what felt even better was watching my son discover his own potential. He wasn't slow. He had never been slow. He was extraordinary, and now everyone knew it. Mrs. Rodriguez requested a transfer to another school shortly after Danny's test results became known among the faculty. Dr. Martinez enrolled in additional training on gifted education. Principal Morrison instituted new screening procedures to identify intellectually gifted students who might be flying under the radar. As for me, I learned to trust my instincts as a mother. I learned that sometimes the people in positions of authority are wrong, spectacularly wrong. I learned that advocating for your child isn't about being difficult or demanding. It's about refusing to let others diminish your child's potential. Danny is thriving now in ways I could never have imagined during those dark months when everyone was trying to convince us both that he was limited. He's not slow. He never was. He's brilliant. And now the world gets to see exactly how bright he shines. Sometimes the people who are supposed to know better don't know anything at all. Sometimes a mother's intuition is worth more than a dozen professional opinions. And sometimes fighting for your child means fighting against an entire system that would rather lower expectations than raise their understanding. Danny taught me that being different isn't being deficient. Being gifted isn't always obvious. And being right, even when everyone says you're wrong, is worth every uncomfortable meeting, every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt. My son isn't slow, he's spectacular, and now everyone knows it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.